Hello everyone and welcome back to Painting with Martin. Today we're going to be painting a Mimic, and this is not my like any official WizKids DnD Mimic. It's simply a Mimic that a friend of mine printed out on his 3D printer. Looks like this, and I've got a painting handle here from Rakarth Creatives, which I backed on Kickstarter, which is going to be hopefully making it a little bit easier for you to see what I'm painting. But for reference, I printed out a picture of a Mimic from online. And this is kind of like the standard Mimic that you see in D&D games. And you can use this Mimic as well as an inspiration for painting your own, as well as using it in any game you want. So I'm going to try to keep it as close as possible to the Mimic in the picture. I'm going to keep it over here as my reference. So you're not going to look at it per se. You maybe will see it here in the background anyways. So I'm going to go for a little bit of an unusual approach to this one, because the wooden box or wooden chest is fairly, wooden. So I'm going to use a stand and I'm going to put this one aside, and I'm going to paint it with a base coat of Zandri Dust from Citadel. Let's see if I can see that, Zandri Dust. And it's going to be one thin layer. It's fairly fluid, this paint anyway, so I don't know why. So I'm going to put it out over here. Hopefully you will be able to see it. Let me know in the comments if you don't. So it's just going to be one thinned small layer of Zandri Dust. And I'm taking great care not to touch the metal bands of the miniature here. And since it's fairly thinned, it's going to be taking not too long to dry as well. So for this one, there's some bands over here that I'm painting in between. Maybe it's part of the chest, maybe it's actually part of the metal bands around the chest. I'm not sure, but I'm gonna try to keep it like this. Turn it around to the side, painting exactly from left to right to where the wood is going, and refilling the brush as I go along. If you make mistakes and you cover the metal bands, don't worry, we can always fix it later. Turn it around as I see, and I have to say this painting handle is phenomenal. You really have to get one of those from Rakarth Creatives if you have the chance for. Maybe they will have a second Kickstarter. I think I backed the second Kickstarter they have, but I'm sure they will have one in the future. Alright, looking a bit like this. Washing my brush in the meantime and putting it down like this for you to see. Now you can see here what I've painted. Oh yeah, as you can see, I also missed one part here, which is good that I've noticed, which is the chest in the front here as well. Can be a little bit tricky to get underneath the tongue, but it shouldn't be too much of an issue. If you don't have these handles, you can just use any handle you want and just put some blue tack on it, or glue it with some super glue and then just deattach it. So putting this one down to a side, closing the paint pot, and then I'm going to be painting the metal bands already with some German grey from Vallejo. Gives it a nice steely finish. And I primed this one using this primer, surface primer white from Vallejo, and I left it a good 12 hours to dry. Normally you should let it dry for about 24 hours if you got the time, but 12 hours will work too well as well. And like I said here as well, I want to make sure here you don't touch the wood you just painted. So you're going to try to be painting it fairly around. starting with the back. You can see some spikes as well in between here. Those part of the teeth or whatever, so you don't want to be touching those too. This is a fairly rugged miniature with some rough edges, and I like that because it gives different angles and variations to what you can paint as well. Not everyone has this, but you can use this as a kind of base for inspiration of how to paint your mimic. Also, I want to say a big thank you to all of you who have subscribed to the channel so far. It really helps me grow, and I would really like, if you're new to the channel, to subscribe as well, so you won't miss any painting tutorials and any news from the channel. If all goes well, I'm going to go to Spiel in about 2 weeks, and I'll be live broadcasting from there almost every day. So if you want to see some news from there, Spiel is the largest board gaming convention in the world, and it has plenty of miniatures, as well as also the Golden Demon painting competition, which everyone can actually participate in from Citadel, or actually Games Workshop. It can be a bit tricky here. I'm going to be trying to covering that as well because I'm a miniature painter. I didn't participate this year because I honestly think I'm not good enough with it. Maybe I'll participate another year, and because I mostly went there for the board games. Moving up over here, we've got a metal band over here. And we'll turn it around. It doesn't have to be perfect, just as long as you're happy with it and it looks good on the table. And we're back to the back side. And we may actually come back with this one once we've covered all the metal bands. And cover any remaining wooden details that we missed out. The reason I'm painting this mimic right now is that there's going to be a workshop in my friendly local board game community in Haifa, Israel, where I live, and it's going to be set for tomorrow, and they're going to be painting this model. So if you're a subscriber and you're from Haifa, Israel, or Israel in general, and you're signed up for the workshop, you're going to be painting this miniature, covering this one up again because it was a bit too thin, and it will give you a rough idea of how to paint this one. So I do recommend you that you watch this one, and that will give you a good idea of what to do tomorrow. And for those of you watching, it's going to take place on the 17th of September 2024, so make sure that if you watch this later, you don't think that it's actually taking place right now. Can be a bit time consuming to paint these bands instead of just going straight metal straight away. But the reason why we do it is that it gives this color here some good limitations where you can place the metal. Oh, I really like this painting handle. It really changes a lot. It's like after you've painted with this one, you don't really want to go back to anything else. I'm sure there are other painting handles there that does the same thing, but I've used a number of them, and this one is really, really good. It's fact that there's ergonomical as well, which means it's good for your hands. And So something like this, very, very basic. Leaving it to dry a good few minutes. While we're doing this one, we can already start looking at the tongue. So I'm going to put this down in a moment. You can see also how I'm painting this one, slowly turning it around. The tongue requires, that's the main attention thing of this one. So I'm going to use a contrast color for this one. You can, this is called Leviathan Purple from Citadel. But if you don't have that one and you don't want to be using contrast, you can use Naggaroth Night from Citadel's base color range, which is technically the same, or at least very similar. So I'm going to use this one here, and I'm going to start by painting the tongue. Taking great care not to actually touch the wooden part now. And as you can probably see, it's very dark, and we're going to lighten it up a little bit later in the highlight stage. But now you can see that the Mimic is actually taking form. If you've never played D&D, D&D is a role-playing game, and a Mimic is a monster that hides in chests. When you're about to open the treasure chest, it comes out and wants to eat you. It's quite scary for lower level characters, and but it can quite easily be defeated. But for lower level character, it's quite a challenge, and it's really fun as a DM to throw in a Mimic in the mix. And because it can swallow you whole as well. So here, going in to paint the inside of the tongue, and I also painted the inside of the mouth with this one. Taking care not to touch the teeth if possible. Maybe it will happen anyways. And you can kind of like dab it around here with your brush. Don't forget the inner side of the tongue here, that can be a little bit hard to get to. If you're using this model, it's not that difficult. But since you primed it in white, you also know exactly where you've gone wrong to where you need more paint. Coming around to the side here, and then also paint the sides here of this Naggaroth Knight, or as I'm using here, Leviathan Purple, to the contrast color. Or the side here, which we're going to highlight up in a couple of stages later on. Also here, before we forget about it, we're going to start also painting a little bit of this color here with where you see the gums. Trying not to touch the teeth if you can. There are other ways you can do this as well, and also try not to touch the inside of the eyes, but painting the eyelids here with this purple too. You can also use the brown if you want to use it as part of the chest. as well as the gums underneath here as well, using this color. Also, if you missed any part of the tongue, now is the time to fix it. Alright, looking quite okay already, but as you can see, there are certain parts of the chest here that really needs to work. Oh yeah, we also missed a small part over here. As part of the chest. Great. So, closing the paint pot, leaving this one over here, quite easy. And now, before we go into the teeth, I'm going to go over the wooden parts, and I'm going to use a special color for this. There's also another contrast color called Contrast Wyldwood, and this is a new technique I've never used before, and I'm going to use it. Of course, you use neat, and you cover all the wooden parts, including those bands over here that you didn't cover. And by using a lighter base, you actually get it to shine through. That's a technique that I recommend that you try, instead of making it all dark in the meantime. And if you missed any spot here, this is the good way to actually cover it, because it covers really well. And it also forms a good way to highlight it. If you feel that it's pooling too much, moving around with your brush, moving to the other parts of the miniature where you have this wooden parts. Here it's pooling way too much, so I'm going to move it around with a damp brush. I'm brushing it off. And of course the front side as well. Turn it around as you see fit. With this painting handle, it's not a problem. And up here as well, don't forget any parts here that we've missed with on the top, so we don't have any white shining through. At all. That looks quite okay already. We already start looking like a mimic. And now we're going to go into the teeth. Sounds bad, but that's what we're going to do. And for this one, we're going to start by using a color called Steel Legion Drab. And Steel Legion Drab, let's see if I can find it. Or Carrack Stone would also be acceptable. Shafted Bone would also be acceptable to use. Or Screaming Skull. They're all optional. I'm bringing them out here for you to see. This is Rakarth Flesh, which might work well. Your Shafted Bone would be this one. And this is Deathclaw Green, which might be a little bit too green. So if I shake this one here a little bit and see if it can bring me a nice one. Yeah, I think we'll go for Rakarth Flesh. And by painting all the teeth with this one, can I give it a rotting feeling instead of just painting them all white. and this is we are going to highlight them a bit with some white. But this one gives a nice base tone to form those rotting teeth with. You can mix in a little yellow in this one if you think it's too khaki. Angling the miniature like this, you see the inside of the Mimic. Something you don't want to be doing when you're playing D&D, because that means you'll die. So don't do that. And there's some white teeth underneath here as well. Don't forget there's a spike over here that we're going to paint as a tooth. Kind of sticking out. And that's it. Before we go over to the other parts of the miniature, I'm going to take a look at the eyes. And for the eyes, I've chosen to use a little bit of an optional approach. I'm going to use something called Trollslayer orange, painting them like bright orange to make them really stand out. I'm not sure how this is going to go. Something like this. Leave this one to dry, and we can turn our attention actually to the metal bands before we go into the tongue itself. The metal bands, we're going to use a color called, let's see where I put it, yep, some gunmetal from Vallejo. Give it a good shake and apply it neat on the metal bands. And you can do it two ways. In this case, I'm going to show you two ways. We can dry brush it, which means you take a bit of the color and wipe it off a kitchen towel like this until you are left with almost no paint. And that means you can touch it like this. Or you can apply it neat over the model the way you see fit. I'm going to dry brush it. Over these parts here. But I'm going to opt for actually applying some of it neat, as it's a bit difficult to reach some of these areas without actually touching the wooden parts. As well as the front. And this is where I don't opt not to dry brush, simply because I don't want to be touching the teeth and the tongue with the metal color. And a little bit more missing up here on the other side. And going over the back, see if we've missed any colors. something like this. Looks quite okay. And now we're actually going to turn our attention, because the wooden paint is not entirely dry yet, so we're going to turn our attention to the tongue finally. And for this one, we are actually going to use a dry brush. And we're going to use the dry brush of Naggaroth Night to blend in the tones a little bit. And this is what you would do if you were to apply Naggaroth Night from the beginning. You would apply Druchii Violet as a wash, and now we don't have to do that, because this one does it for us. And you just go over and dab it around in the mouth here. That was my watch, as well as the side here. Great. Now, for the second dry brush, we're going to use some Genestealer purple from Citadel to give it a little bit of more tonal variation. And this is a highlight. This is what we call a dry brushing highlight. Wipe most of the paint off and start by working around the tip where the sun would shine, making it lighter. And also up here, making it lighter as well, being quite rough with it, but leaving the other the Naggaroth Night or Leviathan purple showing in the dark corners. Here you also want to do this one, lighting it up a little bit, as well as over here. And the tip of the tongue. Looking quite okay. But now let's go over to give a smaller highlight, just using some pure Genestealer purple. Leaving the kind of middle of the tongue as a shadows from the other colors. Hopefully you'll see like this. We'll see if we can angle the light a little bit better. Apologize if the light is not great. I'll try to fix it. And adding the edges of this one, as well as the tip, with some pure Genestealer purple. And you might need a few layers with this one to make sure you get the nice. So you see here it's getting really much brighter, but it's not as bright as I want it. I want it even brighter. So another layer, and then another layer small here on the side, touching it up, dabbing it around, building on the layers that we added previously. And only using a little bit of paint on the brush here, almost like a heavy dry brush. Here adding a little bit more and leaving some shading in the recesses here, giving the impression of a nice shaded miniature. On the top here, I want to go through this one as well with some Genestealer purple, but only a little bit. And you can leave the gums inside as they are. Now, you can see there is some white left over there, so that's not good. So that means we need to apply some pure Naggaroth Night over that one to make sure the eyelids are covered. Can be a little bit tricky, so use a steady brush and a steady hand if you have, to apply it on the eyelids in any white area that you might have missed before. Looking quite okay. Now we'll leave this one to dry and turn our attention to the teeth. And guess what? It's going to be another dry brush, but this is going to be a little bit more white, but not entirely. So for this one, we're going to use an old brush, such as this one, which is kind of like old and worn, and we're going to use some cold white from Vallejo, but just some regular white or white grey would be fine as well. I'm putting this one out over here on top of the palette, probably not ideal, and that means we're going to dry brush it just as we did before with the other colours. Wiping most of it off. Before we do a gentle dry brush on just some parts of the teeth, leaving the others, just leaving the tips highlighted here. It's a good way of also covering up mistakes as you did before. And if you are to touch the tongue too much and the other areas, just go over it as we did over here with some Naggaroth Night, which we're going to do right now, covering up the mistakes as we go along. Always good to do that. And then with some Genestealer purple if you need to. Now we're going to go for our other highlight of the tongue. For that one we need some pink. And for some pink I would recommend using some Empress Children from Citadel. And this is going to be really some small tips, because I really want it to stand out in the front here, painting it up, using a very little brush, very little paint on the brush, a little bit here as well, going down on the edges. Something like this. Now, you could, as an optional touch, add some what we call some Demonette hide on the gums, which I'm going to show you right now. Give it a good shake. And it's a kind of like greyish colour that might work well with gums. I'm going to show you here what it looks like, some small touches, just some decaying gums on some of the parts here where you want it. And you can put it here on the underneath here, as well as here on the sides, as well as in between any gums you want. Like on top here you can do it, as well as underneath the teeth here, lower teeth. Entirely optional, not really necessary if you don't want to. But we do actually have the eyes left. And for the eyes, I'm going to use some Fire Dragon Bright from Citadel. Give it a good shake. And that means we're going to apply a small thing in the middle, leaving it entirely good on the other side. Here, a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit there. Something like this. So if you want to paint a pupil, you can do so as well. Perfectly fine. I'm not going to do that. I think they're good as it is. But I do actually want to recommend putting either some more silver on the thing here, or actually turning our attention to the wood. And for the wood parts, you can do a number of things. Either you can light it up if you want to, or you can remain them and keep it as it is. And if you like it like this, then the mimic is done. And I'm going to show you a few more tricks of actually highlighting the wood, to making it stand out a little bit more before we're actually done. The color we're going to be using is called Deathclaw Brown from Citadel. And a very light brown, and I'm going to use it on selected parts of the miniature, making sure it really stands out. In the case here, the bands here on the back, as well as in between here, a very small, and maybe it's not the way I envisioned it. But when it dries, you can also use Mournfang Brown, which most likely would have been a little bit better for this one. Something like this, and we'll leave it like that. Since it's the back side, no one really cares either. And it also shows that I can make mistakes as well. So, if you like this video, please consider liking and commenting on the video. And if you want to see more comments like this, painting stuff for D&D, the role-playing game, also consider subscribing to my channel. It really, really helps me grow. Every subscriber counts, and I really appreciate it when I get a message on my phone or on my tablet or my device saying that someone has subscribed to the channel. It really, really makes me happy. So this is the Mimic from D&D, and thank you very much for watching.